Well, I think the U.S. wanted Russia to integrate in a way that was subservient to U.S. power. And Russia wanted to integrate as an independent nation that was itself a geopolitical power. And this is really the clash. The United States believes itself to be the unipolar superpower, the unique superpower of the world. Countries that disagree with that, most importantly China and Russia, become perceived by the US as anti-American rather than pro-multipolarity. And so this is really the fundamental difference. Of course, the US mindset transcended the events of the late 80s or early 90s. The whole Cold War was viewed as confrontation with Russia. And I would add that Britain's hatred of Russia goes back centuries for a lot of reasons. And so Britain was already rabidly Russophobic in the 19th century. And a lot of what we see in the rhetoric and in the British media today is a kind of replay of the Crimean War drumbeats that occurred in the middle of the 19th century. It's you would say it's almost humorous if it weren't so tragic and deadly. But a lot of the same points and rhetoric and ugliness that one sees in the comment pages, even of what I think of as sophisticated media like the Financial Times, is pretty simplistic and ugly and very Russophobic.
You were tasked to implement economic reforms in former Soviet Union as well as Russia during the 90s. What happened there when you asked for economic assistance in ensuring that these market reforms take place? How was the response of Washington back then?
Well, just to be clear, I wasn't tasked with implementing anything. You know, I'm an advisor and no power role, but they saw me as possibly a channel to Western finance. And I told them that I would try to be a channel to Western finance. Why? Because I believe that when a country is in financial trouble, the international financial system should help that country to get out of trouble, both as a basic matter of morality and ethics and as a win-win proposition for global cooperation. My guru in this is John Maynard Keynes, who wrote famously The Economic Consequences of the Peace in 1919. And his argument was that the harsh Versailles settlement with Germany would lead to future disaster. It's one of the prophetic books of the 20th century. When I was both a student and practitioner of finance, I took my cue from John Maynard Keynes. Don't be nasty to the defeated power or to the country that is down on its luck. Things that go around, come around, go around. If it's bad one day for somebody, it could be bad for you the next. It's better to be cooperative. I tried in the early 1990s to mobilize Western financial support for Gorbachev's reforms, complete failure. Then President Yeltsin's team asked me similarly. I was a complete failure in mobilizing support. Basically, not on economic argument grounds. My economics is good. It was good at the time. What I had recommended for Poland in financial terms was adopted because Poland was on our side. And I recommended debt relief. I recommended emergency stabilization funding. And it worked. It wasn't just a theory. It worked. So when I recommended the same thing with Russia, I thought, well, I've already shown that these ideas make sense. And they do make sense. But Washington rejected them, not because of the economic debate, which it was sometimes portrayed, but because of the geopolitics, which is, yeah, Poland's on our side, of course we'll help, but they are on the other side, so of course we won't help. And it is almost as simple as that.
Let us move to a fundamental debate that has failed in the German corporate media regarding Ukraine. We have also interviewed a wide range of experts from Noam Chomsky, Chris Hedges, Vijay Prashad, Peter Kazak on this matter, so it would be interesting to get your view as well. Denazification and demilitarizations were reasons given by the Russian state to justify its war in Ukraine. Do you think these reasons had any legitimacy?
Look, the core of this is the clash between the United States and Russia. That clash goes back to 1992 when the neoconservatives took over American foreign policy. This was originally Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz in the administration of George W. Bush Sr. But there are a lot of neocons around. Madeleine Albright was a neoconservative. Hillary Clinton was a neoconservative. Victoria Nuland, who was Assistant Secretary of State during the Maidan in 2014, is now the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. She's a neoconservative. And so what happened was the U.S. foreign policy, starting in 1992, aimed for U.S. dominance. Sometimes called full spectrum dominance, that in every region of the world, the U.S. should be able to blow away, figuratively, I hope, its opponents and antagonists, and to have geopolitical dominance through military, financial, economic, technological, and other means. And in 1992, that was the view. And it looked, oh, who could rival us? Russia's down on its knees. China's a poor, rural country. Well, of course, it was never realistic. The world's never dominated by one country in all of history, though there have been empires, of course, that are powerful. But there's always going to be rivalry and always multipolarity in some sense, and that's especially true in the 21st century. Russia did not buckle under the U.S. View. China, even less so. I would say both of them say, no, we don't want a U.S.-led unipolar world. Now, the U.S. began to implement this in the 1990s with NATO enlargement. Anyone that knows the archival record knows that it wasn't just a loose verbiage, but it was a decided policy of Germany and the United States to promise to Gorbachev no NATO enlargement to the east. And not just to the east, to GDR, to the east. And so a lot of what's said right now is just typical U.S. government spin. But the archival record is actually very extensive. Then in the mid-1990s, Clinton started saying the same to Yeltsin, I know, that no, we're going to have a partnership system. We're not going to have NATO enlargement. But then Madeleine Albright pushed the neocon agenda. We're expanding NATO. And it created a big division inside the U.S. because there's some normal non-neocons inside the U.S., and I'm one of them, and said, no, NATO enlargement is a bad idea. And Bill Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense of Clinton, came close to resigning over this issue. George Kennan, who was our greatest statesman scholar of the 20th century vis-a-vis Russia, said this is the new Cold War. That was back in 1997 that he said that. Then many events followed. The U.S.-led alliance bombed Belgrade in 1999, broke Serbia apart deliberately as part of its geopolitics, and as per neocon ideas, went to war with all of Russia's allies in the Middle East, overthrowing Saddam Hussein, overthrowing Gaddafi, trying to overthrow Assad. So this was a very expansionist period of the U.S., trillions of dollars spent on expansionist wars. And in 2014, the U.S. was part of the successful effort to overthrow Yanukovych. This is absolutely clear. Although we don't know every bit, we know a lot. And I know a lot from my own knowledge about these events. The U.S. played a role in overthrowing a president of Ukraine who was basically pro-Russian, but basically trying to keep some kind of stable equilibrium between the two sides through neutrality of Ukraine. Yes, we want Western this. Yes, we want to keep relations with Russia. Very fragile because the U.S. is pushing NATO enlargement and Russia's saying, hell no. And this is what was happening. And Yanukovych was overthrown and a Western Ukraine highly nationalist government was brought into power. And at that moment, Putin did what he warned George Bush Jr. he would do at the Bucharest summit in 2008. Putin said to George Bush, you expand NATO, we take Crimea back. Don't do it. But the U.S. doesn't listen. So we went to this direct clash, war in the Donbass, and then, sad to say, the Minsk agreements were reached. Germany and France were to be the guarantors. But I don't know if Mrs. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, is speaking ex post as an excuse or telling what she thought at the time, but it's dreadful. What we do know is that the Ukrainians walked away from the Minsk agreements. After signing, my friends tell me, Jeff, how could you ever expect us to honor that? That's trash. I say, yeah, you have an agreement. An agreement. And we're supposed to take this with a straight face. And Germany was a solemn guarantor, uninterested. In the meantime, the U.S. poured in billions of dollars of armaments. By the end of 2021, Putin said to Biden, look, here are the red lines. And the number one red line is NATO enlargement, by far, by the way. And the U.S. said, we're not going to talk about that. Our door is open, which is a ridiculous idea. We're not talking about trade. We're talking about military alliances. What is this open door of military alliances in history? That you don't care who your neighbors are aligned with, where the military bases are, what the weapons are? This is crazy rhetoric, I'm sorry to say. So provocative and dangerous. And the invasion started in February 2022. But the war, everyone should understand, started in February 2014. The war did not start in February 2022, and this is not the West reacting. The United States started in 1992 to break the agreements that it had given to Gorbachev. Why? Because they felt they could. That's it.